Welcome back, friends. Welcome back. Got a little bit different type of show for you today. I spent some time talking to James Johnson from Tanglefoot Cycles and Discord Components and Fifth Season Canvas, and of course, his bike shop, Analog Cycles. And we talk about, his stems, obviously. We fill in some of the gaps that maybe I missed when I did the video about the stems a week or so ago. And we talk about the two frames that he designed, and then we talk about the bags and why he made the bags and why he made them the way he did. I respect the hell out of James, quite honestly, because he didn't wait around for someone to design and make the thing that he thought should be out there in the market. He just went and did it himself. So it's a great conversation. I think you'll really like it. If you come up with any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments. And if I can answer them, I certainly will. And if I can't, I'll get James to answer them. Enjoy.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
So, you're a man of many parts. And you saw the little video I did last week about your Discord Components stems. So why don't you fill in the blanks for me? What did I miss?
Oh, well, I don't think you missed a whole lot, but I'll just sort of talk about maybe how I came up with this idea. And I think some people have read the right stem write-up that we have, which basically says, I was looking at these old Wright brothers bikes. These guys were obviously geniuses. They made all of their parts in-house. They could have made stems any length they wanted, and they chose to make 0s and 30 millimeter stems, and they were riding on roads that were very similar to the kind of roads that I like to ride on, which was to say awful roads, muddy, rocky, rooty. They weren't, there was no pavement when they were riding around on bikes. Maybe there was cobbles, which are arguably worse than a dirt road. And they were riding what we would consider today to be gravel bikes, drop bars, big tires, relaxed head angle. But none of their bikes, no matter the size, had toe clip overlap issues, no matter what tire you were running. And I just became fascinated by that idea. And I started to look at turn of the last century bikes for inspiration for current problems, to how to fix current problems with bikes. And that's how the super short stem idea came about. And obviously it's happening in the mountain bike world, but it really hasn't started to trickle down seriously to gravel bikes yet, or road bikes. But I think it's coming. And I think that these are just sort of the tip of the iceberg.
So how do those short stems play with, because those bikes had pretty slack head tube angles, yeah?
Yeah, they did. But I found a resource online called oldbike.eu, which if you're into bikes and you want to be a real student of bikes, it's absolutely worth checking it out. It's an online museum dating back to the mid 1800s of bikes, and it goes up until the 30s or so. And there's hundreds and hundreds of bikes on there, and a lot of them are shot right from the side. The photography is not amazing, but a lot of them, if the picture is directly from the side, you can import that photograph into BikeCAD and copy the geometry of the bike, and see what the geometry numbers are in those bikes. The catalogs don't tell you trail or fork offset or anything. But the curious thing is, if you copy those geometries, the trail numbers are really similar to a high or mid-neutral trail position that have a lot of fork offset and they have a slack head tube angle. So those bikes, even though they look funky, handle just like a Sam Hilborn or a Bridge Club or whatever. They just do it in a different way. But for practical purposes, riding them, if you could somehow ride them blindfolded safely, you would not notice funky front end geometry in terms of handling.
So Under what circumstances would you say you've got a customer that's got a bridge club,
Yeah.
is thinking about buying a bridge club?
Yeah.
Under what circumstances would that customer want to investigate or possibly use a creamy or a peeper stem?
So we're drop bar fanatics, and we think that drop bars are the best handlebar out there for 80+% of the population, because they have 5 hand positions, and you can get low, you can get high, you can get comfortable, you can stretch out, and that only works if the handlebars are in the right position. So if you have a bridge club, which is sort of like a 90s mountain bike geometry, a fairly long top tube, but not a crazy long top tube, the only way you're going to run drop bars comfortably is to throw a super short stem on there. And with any dirt drop setup, you want them level with the saddle or higher than the saddle. um, and So you need a short stem and also a tall stack height stem to be able to achieve that. And so it would work great on a bridge club or a ogre, or any of the non-drop bar surleys work fantastic with one of those short stems, and the handling's great. I think you've ridden a bridge club with a peeper stem on there, and
Currently.
yeah, yeah. And you think, hey, this is going to make it handle like garbage if you accept, 70 years of this BS that you need a 70 millimeter stem for a bike to handle well, or longer. But it's obviously nonsense. It has no bearing, or no major bearing on how the bike handles. You can't, it doesn't throw you to the ground or feel sketchy or anything. It just works. So, oddly.
And, am I right to assume then that it would only be reasonable to use, let's use the peeper, for example, with like a Moloko bar or a Jones bar, if you had just a dramatically short torso?
Yeah, or short arms, or
Right.
a really long front end bike. Like, I'm not an advocate of these, but something like a Kona unit with an insanely long top tube, for its size. Any of those, I think, would be a valid use of a peeper. And they're strong enough that if someone wanted to use it as an enduro stem, or an all mountain stem, you could totally do that as well.
Yeah. So, like I said, man of many parts. I think even back when I got into the bike business, which was seemingly now when dirt was new, um, in the late 80s and early 90s, there was this talk about owning your brand. And back then, it really, I think, amounted to not much more than, instead of selling a specialized seat bag or a Trek at that time seat bag, now Bontrager, you would have a seat bag with your name on it.
Right,
That
right.
was what then they considered, owning your brand, having tire levers with your name stamped on them or water bottle cages. And you've not only taken it a step further, I mean, you've blown way past that, because Tanglefoot, I mean, you didn't wait for somebody to design a bike that you wanted to ride. You just went out and designed it yourself. How did that happen?
Well, I was riding a Crust Evasion, and I really liked a lot of things about it. In particular, I liked the fit. I had it set up with an LD stem, setback seat post. It was a very comfortable bike, and because it had plus size tires, which I had never ridden before, um, I was able to ride technical terrain that I had not been able to master before on a 26-inch rigid mountain bike. And I was much more comfortable. My back didn't hurt, my hands didn't hurt, because I had more tire volume. I had a more comfortable riding position, and I had it set up with drop bars. And um, and I at the time, we had a really close relationship with Crust, and I had proposed that we sort of make a more mountain bike version of the Evasion, because the Evasion has pretty bad toe clip overlap on most of the sizes. So at low speeds, your foot's whacking the front tire. Had a road height bottom bracket, It had road head angle, road C-tube angle, and very bad standover, all of which makes it a really cool dirt road bike, but a crappy mountain bike. But I wanted to go mountain biking, and so anyway, that didn't work out with Crust, and so I just said, well, I have to do it then. If they're not going to make my idea of a good mountain bike, I have no choice. I'm going to make it, and so we really tried hard to get it made in the U.S. and I reached out to every small and large manufacturer for the Moonshiner. And nobody could make it. No one wanted to make it because they decided it was too complicated, too many bent tubes, too many little details. So that every factory in America turned me down for making the frame, and so we ended up going to Taiwan to actually get it done. And it was at this point it's been a 5-year process to try to get the bike made.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like I talked to you probably right before or as I was moving my store, and we talked about frames.
Yeah, and at one point it really looked like they were going to get made in the U.S. and so they were tied up in a U.S. prototyping phase for over a year, which really put the whole project back when that didn't work out. But we learned a lot, and the Taiwanese folks are super fun to work with and really nice, and the quality is just through the roof. Like perfect welds, perfect paint. I mean, I can see why Rivendell makes frames in Taiwan and Surly and all those folks. They're just really good.
Yeah, I not to disparage the U.S. builder that Rivendell was using, but having seen, some of the hunkapillars that we got right before they kind of discontinued that model and moved everything to Taiwan.
Yeah,
just comparing those frames to the Taiwanese frames is, it's as good or better at nearly half the price.
Yep. Yeah, totally. And the Taiwanese folks are cool because they'll do anything for a price. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but if you want custom bent tubing like the Moonshiner has, they'll do it. They're gonna charge you to build the tooling to do it, but they're not gonna say, hey, that's too hard. They're just gonna figure out how to do it. And I really like that they're problem solvers. They're not gonna say, oh, that's not something we can do. It's too complicated. They're just gonna say, this is what the tooling is gonna cost. Are you okay with that? And then go ahead.
They're also, if I had to guess, not terribly interested in spending a long time telling you why they think your design won't work.
No, they don't give a crap. Like if you could make a totally non-functional bike and they would build it for you,
sure.
Which is a little bit something to be careful of. Just for an example, they send you these really complicated CAD drawings of the bikes before they go into prototype, and there are a million numbers on these sheets. A lot of them are manufacturing specific numbers. You don't know what they mean or what they pertain to. They're what they're going to use to set up their jigs and all that. So we got the prototype Moonshiners and the prototype hardtacks and didn't look at one number on the fork drawings, and that was the steerer tube number. And they sent us 300 millimeter steerer tubes, which are too short when your head tube is this big. On the extra large hardtack, it's an unrideable prototype because there's only this much steerer tube sticking out of the head tube. And since then, I've rectified that, and everything's 400 millimeters. But they'll send you exactly what you ask for, and
right.
Nothing more, nothing less,
right.
Which is to be commended. But also, I wish I had a mentor or something who could look at this stuff and say, hey, that you need a 400 millimeter one of those, not a 300 millimeter one of those.
Yeah, I've told people more times than I can count. It's like, it's a good thing that I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah.
Because if I did, there's a great likelihood that I wouldn't have done it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of all of this stuff. We just dive in head first and then hope we can make it back to the top of the swimming pool to get some air.
Yeah. So
Why don't you just kind of quickly describe the Moonshiner and the hardtack? Hardtack?
Yeah, hardtack. You got it. Yeah. So the Moonshiner, they're both similar bikes, but the Moonshiner is bigger tires. You can clear 27.5 by 3-inch tires, front and rear on 45 millimeter wide rims, and that's a ton of float in rough conditions. You can run those tires, without cush cores at about 15 psi, and with cush cores down to 10 psi. So just a really soft ride.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Cush cores?
Yeah. So if you're riding
pretend like I'm old.
Okay. So there's a lot of different versions of the cush core out there, but it's a foam insert that it sort of lays in the bed of the rim. And the idea is if you're riding on really rocky terrain like we have, you're running tubeless, so you're not going to get a pinch flat, but you can still smash up the rim on rocks. So the cush cores are really dense foam that you sort of put on the rim like a tubular, like you sort of stretch it onto the rim, and it goes into the bottom of the rim, and then it comes out sort of in a Y shape and supports the lower third of the sidewalls of the tire.
Okay.
So you can run really low pressure and have a really light rim and not worry about damaging your rim. And they're expensive. They add weight. They're not for everyone, but if you're riding in what we call the NAR, it's nice to have.
All right.
So we have roads here that are, without exaggeration, they look like trout streams. They have water flowing down them. They have rocks this big, and it just goes on for miles. And there's just it's fun, but it's terrible conditions to ride in. And there's one area that we ride. It's called 6 Mile Trail. It's a snowmobile trail. There's a stream bed flowing with water. You could totally trout fish in it. And there's the road bed that we ride on. They're indistinguishable from each other. One is the road, technically, but it has water, frogs, the whole thing. Anyway, that's what the Moonshiner's for, is for sort of really, you can ride it on regular mountain bike trails for sure. It's be super fun. But if you're riding in rocks, rough stuff, it's got a high bottom bracket. It's got the big tires. It's got all the mounts so you'd want to go bike packing with it. It's a really stiff frame. You can load it up with 30-40 pounds of gear, and it's not going to get all noodly like a lot of bikes do. And it's sort of your all-day mountain bike, class 4 gravel bike for just the worst riding you can throw at it. If you want to go on a world tour and do mountain biking everywhere, or just goat paths or whatever, that's the bike you would take. And the hardtack, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, it was kind of like what the ECR was supposed to be.
Yes, it's inspired by bikes like the ECR or even the Troll. And the difference is it has a higher bottom bracket. It's very fashionable right now to put low bottom brackets on mountain bikes under the mistaken belief that it makes them more stable. In reality, the opposite's true. It doesn't make it any more stable. It just lowers your bottom bracket height. People think high bottom brackets are unstable, but there's actually a really great a write-up that Grant Peterson did in a Rivendell Reader in the 90s, where he was riding a Rivendell with a low bottom bracket. And look, we're Rivendell dealers. I love Riv. I love Grant, but this is just funny. He says, I was riding my custom Rivendell road for months and months, and then someone gave him a cross bike with a high bottom bracket. And for about a week, he didn't like it because it was very different from his Riv. And he said it was very stable, almost quote unquote too stable. And then he went back to the Riv after a couple weeks of riding the cross bike, and he said that the Rivendell felt wrong after he came back from the cross bike. And he said, I know it's not. I know I'm right. I know that low bottom brackets are good, but it felt wrong. So this is just a really, I think, good anecdote that even like the biggest proponent in the world of low bottom brackets rode a high bottom bracket bike, got to like it enough that when he got back on his own bike, it didn't feel as good. But high bikes, tall bikes, bone shakers, all of those are stable. That's why people can ride them. If a lamplighter bike wasn't stable, people would fall off of them. But in fact, they're very easy to balance, partially because the bottom bracket is so freaking high.
Right.
Anyway, I digress.
So then what's the hardtack for?
So, I the hardtack is for the same stuff that the Moonshiner's for, but at a lower price point, $400-ish less. It's a simpler bike. It doesn't have quite the tire clearance. It has clearance for 2.6-inch tires. More simple fork, a unicrown fork to keep the cost down. No custom bent tubing that kept our tooling costs down. And I really have this passion to bring out a bike. The hardtack doesn't quite hit it, but I'm working there to come out with a bike that's a complete bike that's $1,500. That's not a piece of crap that people can ride for 25 years. Because I've done some adjusting for inflation, but I grew up riding Specialized rock hoppers, steel, super simple. They rode great. They were $725, which if you adjust for inflation is about $1,500 today.
Right.
And I was a kid working at Subway, and I could afford that bike. And I think that the mountain bike industry is doing itself a crazy disservice by making the entry level price point bike realistically 2,500 plus for a good, legitimate, long lasting off road bike. And I wanted to say, look, you don't need suspension, you don't need hydraulics, you don't need electronics. You can make a good frame at a relatively affordable price point, and then actually get teenagers to ride again, or people of lesser means to be able to ride again. I think if you don't support that next generation of riders, you won't have people buying $4,000 bikes down the road. So that's what the hardtack's about.
Yeah, I mean, and not to get into into the weeds talking about the industry, but I mean, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. It's just, I think the industry did themselves a great disservice. And it started, everybody wants to say it started with Lance, but I think it really started with Greg LeMond, that every bike had to be a race bike.
Sure. Yeah.
And then they essentially, to use a often used and sometimes misused word nowadays, they disenfranchised 95% of the people that were out there that wanted to buy bikes.
Yeah. I mean, the advent of Lycra in the 90s was terrible. I think it just in the sense that it made it so that if you had any body type except a racer, you looked like a fool wearing that stuff, and still do to this day. The weird space clowns running around out there, and mountain biking and bike touring and even road riding, not road racing, but road riding back in the 80s and back in the 70s was just put on your shorts, put on your t-shirt and your flannel or whatever, and go ride, man. And look at the pioneers of mountain biking. They were doing it in jeans and boots and all the same stuff we ride in now, but it was a big push against that.
All those folks that rode cross country in the 70s in wool shorts.
Yeah.
And hard ass Brooks saddles. Back when they really were hard.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Now they break in too fast. No, I mean, and I always remind people, Brooks saddles were invented before chamois were invented, and they were definitely invented before chamois were foam rather than leather, and they're designed to be ridden just with shorts or pants or whatever, and chamois actually can cause essentially a pressure point because they bunch up and cut off blood flow.
People are surprised to hear that they still to this day recommend breaking those saddles in without padded shorts.
Oh yeah. I mean, you want it to fit to your sit bones. It's
right.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I just wish that their leather would get a little thicker again. The last time I really loved their saddles was not that long ago, but they came out with that organic one.
Yeah.
And that was a really nice saddle.
Didn't last long.
No. I love the shape of the Bear 2 saddles, but I can't get more than 6 months out of one, so I've stopped selling those. I find that unconscionable for a $200 saddle that it lasts me 6 months.
Right. Okay. Maybe a quick word on fifth season, and then I'll let you go.
Sure. So Fifth Season is a brand that is. I saw a lot of bike bags out there that were nice, but I would call over featured. And also a lot of bike bags use plastic buckles. And I wanted to make a bike brand that used traditional materials, employed New Englanders, and had with everything on it was going to be repairable or easily replaced. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, you could compost the bag. So if the bag's 40 years old and covered in holes, it doesn't need to go in the trash. You can just throw it in your compost pile, maybe cut off the brass buckles, throw it in the compost pile. So we're working toward a completely plastics-free line. Right now, the Squall Sack, which is made for a 137, walled 137 basket, all new ones being made are completely compostable. The webbing is hemp, and the canvas is waxed canvas. The clasp is brass, and our hope is to make the entire line that way by the end of the year. We're working on a frame bag for the Moonshiner, a custom frame bag. Gonna be made in Vermont. Same thing. There's going to be plastic in it, but it's recycled campaign signs, and you can remove the plastic, so that again, at the end of the product's life, you can recycle the campaign signs and then recycle the bag, or not. You could compost the whole bag. So no one's doing that. I think that the companies that own and then the companies that designed X-Pac and Cordura, they were part of they're not good companies. The same people that developed X-Pac developed Teflon. And Teflon is not a good material to have out in the environment, and neither is flaking X-Pac. And I don't know. I think the bike industry needs to do more to be more environmentally responsible. This is our fifth season's my stab at that. I'm sure somebody could pick it apart and say that I'm doing everything all wrong, but it's the best that I know how to do to try to make bike bags more sustainable.
Outstanding. James, thank you for doing this today. It's good
to absolutely. See you. Yeah, good to see you as well.
Haven't talked in a while. Yeah. Say hello to Candace.
Will do.
And rattle off the website addresses. And I'll put them in the description as well.
Yeah. So it's just www.tanglefoocycles.com, and you can see fifth season, Discord, and Tanglefoot all on there. There's a list of our dealers, and Chris at Psychic Driller is one of our dealers, and he's one of our oldest dealers. They're listed on there under merchants.
Oldest both from a timeline standpoint and literally.
Yeah, well, both, but with age comes experience, and we appreciate that. So yeah, thanks for having me, and good luck with your spring season.
Yeah, there's not much to sell, but we're doing what we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good luck with it regardless, and I'm sure we'll chat soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.